When people around the world hear the words Middle East, many immediately think of war, instability, and political crisis. News headlines from the region often include words like conflict, terrorism, military strikes, or geopolitical tension. For decades, this region has appeared to outsiders as a place where peace is temporary and conflict is constant. But to truly understand why the Middle East experiences so many conflicts, we must look far deeper than modern news headlines. The roots of these tensions stretch across centuries of history, geography, religion, colonial politics, and strategic resources that have turned the region into one of the most contested areas on Earth. The Middle East sits at the crossroads of three continents: Asia, Africa, and Europe. Because of this geography, it has always been a strategic bridge between civilizations. Empires throughout history fought to control this region because whoever controlled it could influence trade routes, military movement, and cultural exchange across vast territories. From ancient times, powerful empires such as the Persian Empire, the Roman Empire, and later, the Ottoman Empire competed for influence over this land. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire governed most of the Middle East. Under Ottoman rule, different ethnic and religious groups lived under a single imperial authority. While tensions existed, the empire maintained a relative balance through a system that allowed communities to govern many of their internal affairs. But that balance began to collapse. In the early 20th century, when the Ottoman Empire weakened during the global turmoil of World War I, the end of World War I changed the political map of the Middle East forever. As the Ottoman Empire collapsed, European powers moved quickly to divide the region into spheres of influence. The two dominant powers shaping this new order were the United Kingdom and France. Through secret agreements and negotiations, these powers carved the region into new borders that did not always reflect the ethnic, tribal, or religious realities on the ground. One of the most famous arrangements was the Sykes-Picot Agreement, a secret deal that divided much of the Middle East between British and French control. New countries were created, borders were drawn across deserts and mountains. Communities that had lived together for centuries suddenly found themselves separated or forced into new states. These artificial borders planted the seeds of future conflicts that still shape the region. Today, one example of this legacy is the creation of modern Iraq. The new state combined Sunni Arabs, Shia Arabs, and Kurdish populations into a single country. While the intention was to create a stable administrative unit, these groups had different political interests and historical grievances. Over time, tensions between them would erupt into violence and political instability. Another example is Syria, where multiple ethnic and religious communities were brought together under a single government structure. These groups included Sunni Muslims, Alawites, Christians, Kurds, and Druze. Managing this diversity required delicate political balance. And when that balance collapsed decades later, the country plunged into a devastating civil war. The creation of the State of Israel in 1948 became another major turning point in Middle Eastern conflict. After World War II and the Holocaust, the international community supported the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. However, this decision displaced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and triggered immediate conflict between Israel and neighboring Arab states. That the Arab-Israeli wars that followed reshaped regional politics. Countries such as Egypt, Jordan, and Syria fought multiple wars with Israel. Although some peace agreements were eventually reached, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains one of the most emotionally charged and unresolved disputes in modern history. Religion is often seen as a major cause of Middle Eastern conflict, but the reality is more complex. Religion does play a role, particularly the division between Sunni and Shia Muslims, but political power and strategic interests are usually the deeper drivers of conflict. The Sunni-Shia divide dates back more than 1,300 years to disagreements over leadership of the Muslim community after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. Over centuries, this split became embedded in political identities across the region. Today, many regional rivalries reflect this divide. For example, The competition between Iran and Saudi Arabia is often described as a struggle for influence between Shia and Sunni power centers. However, religion alone does not explain the conflicts. Political ambitions, national interests, and regional leadership ambitions also play powerful roles. Governments often use religious identity as a tool to mobilize support, but the underlying motivations frequently involve power, territory, and strategic control. Another major factor in Middle Eastern conflict is oil. The discovery of vast oil reserves in the 20th century transformed the region into one of the most strategically important areas in the world. Oil wealth brought enormous economic power to certain countries, but it also attracted foreign interest and intervention. The global economy depends heavily on energy resources, and the Middle East holds some of the largest oil reserves on Earth. Because of this, global powers have long sought to maintain influence in the region. Countries such as the United States, Russia, and others have frequently become involved in Middle Eastern politics. These external interventions sometimes aimed to stabilize the region, but they often created new tensions instead. Military interventions, political alliances, and economic pressures have reshaped the balance of power many times. One example is the invasion of Iraq. In 2003, by the United States and its allies, the removal of Saddam Hussein's government created a power vacuum that intensified sectarian tensions inside Iraq. Militant groups emerged, regional powers competed for influence, and the country experienced years of violence and instability. Conflicts in the Middle East are also deeply connected to the concept of regional influence. Major powers within the region compete to shape political outcomes in neighboring countries. Iran supports certain political and militant groups across the region, while Saudi Arabia and its allies support others. This competition often turns local conflicts into larger proxy struggles. The civil war in Syria is a powerful example of how local and regional conflicts merge together. What began as protests during the Arab Spring eventually became a multi-layered war involving regional powers, global powers, and numerous armed groups. Economic inequality also contributes to instability. Some Middle Eastern countries possess enormous wealth from oil exports, while others struggle with unemployment, poverty, and limited economic opportunities. This imbalance can create frustration among populations, particularly young people. Demographics add another layer to the issue. The Middle East has a very young population. Millions of young people enter the workforce every year, but many economies cannot create enough jobs to support them. When economic expectations are not met, political frustration can grow quickly. Political systems in the region also influence conflict dynamics. Some countries operate under monarchies, others under military governments, and others under complex hybrid political systems. In many cases, political participation is limited, which can lead to protests or unrest when citizens feel their voices are not heard. The Arab Spring of 2011 demonstrated how quickly dissatisfaction could spread across the region. Protests erupted in multiple countries demanding political reform, economic opportunity, and social justice. Some governments implemented reforms, while others responded with force. In several cases, these uprisings turned into prolonged conflicts. Despite the perception that the Middle East is always in conflict, it is important to recognize that the region is also home to rich cultures, ancient civilizations, scientific achievements, and diverse societies. The narrative of constant war often overshadows the complexity and resilience of the people who live. Their understanding why the Middle East experiences repeated conflicts requires looking at the intersection of history, colonial borders, religious identity, geopolitical competition, economic resources, and external intervention. None of these factors alone explains the situation. Together, they form a complicated web that continues to shape the region today. And yet, despite all these challenges, the future of the Middle East is not predetermined. Political reforms, economic diversification, diplomacy, and regional cooperation all have the potential to reduce tensions over time. But achieving lasting stability requires addressing the deep structural issues that have fueled conflict for generations.